Where is Sarah Ferguson now, do you know? Because I've read reports that she's in the United Arab Emirates and broke. I've also read reports that she spent a month at a luxury Swiss resort that cost $25,000 a day.
The woman who once slept beneath golden ceilings at Buckingham Palace is tonight checking into a £113-a-night lodge on the windswept coast of Ireland. Not a suite, not a private wing, a standard room. The same woman who was reportedly staying at a Swiss recovery clinic charging £16,000 a day, a place so exclusive that its clientele doesn't just buy privacy, they buy erasure from the world, is now walking the rugged cliffs of County Donegal, head down, collar up, hoping nobody recognizes her face. That face, the one that smiled through royal weddings, that launched diet empires and charity galas and Weight Watchers campaigns. That face that once graced the covers of glossy magazines on 3 continents. Today, that face is hiding, and the story of why she is hiding, the emails, the frozen accounts, the companies wiped from the registry, the charity shuttered, the friends gone silent, is one of the most extraordinary collapses in modern royal history. So let's ask the question the press has been dancing around. Where is Sarah Ferguson right now? And is there any coming back from this? Stay with us, because what we are about to walk you through is not gossip. It is a documented, court-verified, company registry-confirmed dismantling of a life built on borrowed time. The paper trail of a vanishing act. To understand where Sarah Ferguson is now, you have to understand where she was trying to be just weeks ago. This story doesn't begin in Donegal. It begins in Zurich. For weeks in early 2026, reporters and royal watchers were tracking a trail that led straight to the Paracelsus Recovery Clinic in the Swiss Alps. If you've never heard of it, that's by design. Paracelsus is the kind of place that exists specifically so the ultra-wealthy can disappear without a trace. We're not talking yoga retreats and green smoothies. We're talking a full-spectrum private medical and wellness facility where the minimum daily rate was reported at around £16,000 per day. Let that number breathe for a moment. While ordinary people are calculating whether they can afford the weekly shop, the Duchess of York was reportedly ensconced in a fortress of gold-dusted air, soul-rewiring therapy, and the kind of silence that only extreme wealth can purchase. But here's where the story takes its first sharp turn. The money stopped. Not slowed, not reduced, stopped. And when the money stops at that level, when someone who was spending £16,000 a day suddenly can't, it doesn't just mean a change of address. It means a change of everything. The accounts, the credit, the staff, the plans, the possibilities, all of it, gone in what appears to have been a matter of weeks. The destination that replaced Zurich tells you everything about the speed of the fall. The Ballyliffin Lodge in County Donegal, Ireland. Rooms starting at approximately £113 a night. Do the maths. That is a 99% reduction in overnight accommodation cost. From a £16,000 a day Swiss medical retreat to a £113 a night Irish lodge. In the space of one news cycle. Some of you watching will say, £113 a night is not exactly roughing it. And you're right. A 4-star coastal lodge in Ireland is perfectly lovely, but we are not measuring this against most people's standards. We are measuring it against hers, against decades of royal circles, private jets, palace dining rooms, and luxury brands. And against that backdrop, this is a woman in free fall. But why? What happened that was so sudden, so catastrophic, that it triggered this dramatic collapse in a matter of weeks? The answer is worse than most people expected. The emails that changed everything. There is a moment in every high-profile scandal where the abstract becomes the specific, where associations and alleged links are replaced by something far more damaging, documented words, in black and white, that cannot be unsaid. For Sarah Ferguson, that moment arrived in early 2026, when the Department of Justice in the United States began releasing a new tranche of digital evidence connected to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Most observers expected the usual roster of names. What they did not anticipate was the depth and directness of Sarah Ferguson's involvement, spelled out not in hearsay, but in her own emails. The first category is financial. The correspondence reportedly contains exchanges in which Sarah Ferguson appears deeply financially entwined with Epstein over a period that one email allegedly describes as 15 years of financial support. Not a one-off gift, not a business arrangement. 15 years. There is even a reportedly surfaced exchange from April 2011 in which Sarah is described as having begged for a job as Epstein's house assistant. Not a board seat, not a consultancy role, a house assistant, because, in her own apparent words, she desperately needed the money. Think about what that means. Here was a woman with a royal title, a recognizable face, a charity, a memoir, and a Weight Watchers contract. And she was reportedly emailing a man already considered by much of the world to be a dangerous predator to ask if she could work in his house. The second category of emails is arguably more disturbing, because it speaks directly to character. Sarah reportedly wrote to Epstein stating that she did not, and would not, refer to him as a pedophile in private, even while publicly distancing herself from him. The suggestion, if accurate, is devastating, that the outrage she performed for cameras was entirely manufactured, that the protective distance she claimed to maintain was, behind closed doors, non-existent. She was not just staying loyal. She was, according to this reporting, actively managing the gap between her public statements and her private ones, and communicating that management directly to the man at the center of one of the worst child abuse scandals in modern history. But there is a third layer to these emails that has received less attention and deserves far more. Sarah allegedly facilitated connections between Epstein and people in her own personal circle, including, appallingly, her own goddaughter, as well as references to her daughters. There are also reportedly emails in which she relays information about other women to Epstein in terms that can only be described as deeply inappropriate, describing a woman's physical appearance and single status in the context of potential romantic interest. These are not the emails of a naive bystander. These are the emails of someone who was, by all available evidence, an active participant in Epstein's world, financially dependent on it, socially embedded in it, and privately loyal to it, even as she publicly condemned it. And when those emails became public, the consequences were almost instantaneous. The corporate demolition. Here is something rarely discussed in the broader coverage: the sheer scale of the business empire she had built around her name and title. Sarah Ferguson was commercially industrious. She created companies, charities, platforms, and brands. She leveraged her royal-adjacent status aggressively and for a long time, profitably, until February 2026, when that empire was dismantled in the space of a single week. 6 companies linked directly to Sarah Ferguson were either officially wound down or entered the process of being struck from the corporate registry. Let's go through them, because the names alone tell the story of a life's ambitions reduced to a company's house graveyard. See Phoenix Events, an events and hospitality enterprise, the kind of venture that trades entirely on the personal brand of its founder. Gone. Fergie's Farm, a rural lifestyle brand, part of her attempt to position herself as relatable and down-to-earth. Gone. Luna Investments, a financial holding vehicle, the entity that funds and directs the others. Gone. Solomon Ltd., a corporate entity whose exact activities were never fully public, but whose disappearance signals the unwinding of something larger. Gone. Philanthropreneur Limited, perhaps the most revealing name on this list. A blended word, philanthropy and entrepreneur, capturing exactly the persona Sarah Ferguson spent decades constructing. The idea that you could be commercially successful and socially virtuous at the same time. Gone. Planet Partners Productions, a media and content production company, the vehicle for her broadcasting ambitions, her podcast projects, her planned television work. Gone. 6 companies. 1 week, February 2026. And then, as if the universe had a sense of timing, came the 7th blow. Sarah's Trust, the global charity she had founded with enormous fanfare, dedicated to supporting forgotten women and children, announced it would close for the foreseeable future. Think carefully about the timing here. The charity closes at precisely the moment when emails surface depicting her begging for money from a convicted sex offender. The organization that was supposed to protect women and children is shuttered, just as evidence emerges suggesting she may have helped connect that same sex offender to vulnerable people in her own personal life. The irony is not subtle. It is brutal. Corporate sponsors who had tolerated years of drama, who calculated that the benefits of association outweighed the risks, finally saw enough. They didn't just reduce their association, they ran, not quietly either. Several departures were public, deliberate, and designed to signal distance as clearly as possible. Without the companies, there is no corporate income. Without the charity, there is no platform. Without the platform, there is no brand. Without the brand, there is no justification for the speaking fees, the partnerships, the luxury hotel stays. Everything that generated money for Sarah Ferguson was tied, one way or another, to her ability to project an image of redemption, resilience, and relevance. That image is now gone. The Middle East gambit. Here is a question worth sitting with. When you have burned your bridges in Britain, in Europe, in America, where do you go? For Sarah Ferguson, the answer appears to be the Middle East. Multiple reports in early 2026 placed her in the United Arab Emirates, not on holiday, not on a promotional visit, but in what insiders describe as an active attempt to secure financial support from regional rulers and wealthy figures. She is not acting like someone who believes this storm will pass. She is not waiting at home in Windsor, confident the press cycle will turn and the corporate sponsors will return. She is acting like someone who knows the UK chapter of her life is functionally over and who is looking, urgently, for a new financial foundation somewhere that the Epstein emails carry less cultural weight, where her royal title still opens doors, and where powerful men with money are not yet fully briefed on the complete picture. In parts of the Gulf, Duchess of York still opens doors that it no longer opens in London. But here is the uncomfortable reality. The digital trail follows her everywhere. The emails are in the public domain. The company closures are in the public registry. The charity shutdown is in the news. None of that disappears because you board a flight to Dubai. And the legal exposure doesn't disappear either. She has been described by legal commentators as a material witness to activities in Epstein's network, a regular visitor to his properties during periods when the documented abuse was occurring. The question of whether she will be called to testify before the U.S. Senate or other formal investigative bodies remains live. In the UK, separately, questions have been raised about HMRC and her financial arrangements over the years. Questions about her charitable entities, compliance with UK charity law, and whether the line between personal income and charitable activity was always as clear as it should have been. None of these processes have concluded. Some have barely begun. Which means County Donegal may not simply be a retreat from financial difficulty. It may also be a retreat from a gathering storm of formal accountability. Andrew's arrest and the York brand implosion. We cannot tell Sarah Ferguson's story in 2026 without talking about the man whose shadow has defined her public life for 30 years, Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. In February 2026, while Sarah was navigating the collapse of her business empire and the exposure of her Epstein emails, her ex-husband was arrested on his 66th birthday. The timing felt almost theatrical in its precision. The man who famously denied everything in a BBC interview, widely considered one of the most catastrophic PR performances in broadcasting history, taken into custody on his birthday as a global press corps watched. The York brand, already severely damaged, already operating on the very margins of royal tolerance, did not just take a further hit. It effectively ceased to exist as a functioning entity in those hours. King Charles has made a deliberate, consistent decision to prioritize the survival of the institution over the survival of the family. Individual members who represent a threat to the Crown's reputation must be managed accordingly. That management, in the case of the Yorks, has been ruthless. No public support, no royal resources, no safety net. Sarah Ferguson spent decades trading on her proximity to the royal family, using the Duchess of York title as currency in every business deal, every brand partnership, every charity launch. That currency has now been revoked. And here is the thing about being cut off from an institution as powerful as the British monarchy. It doesn't just affect your PR, it affects your access. It affects the rooms you can enter, the people who will return your calls, the platforms willing to associate with you. Without the implied endorsement of the Crown, however distant, however unofficial, the Duchess of York is just a divorced woman in her mid-60s with a complicated history and a growing list of legal questions. That is who is currently staying at the Ballyleafin Lodge. The Donegal retreat, what it really means. Let's spend a moment in Donegal, because it's worth understanding what this place represents, both geographically and symbolically. County Donegal sits at the very northwest tip of Ireland, one of the most remote most exposed, most dramatically beautiful corners of the British Isles. The coastline is breathtaking. The wind comes in off the Atlantic without anything to slow it down. It is also, crucially, the kind of place where a former duchess can walk along the shore without a press pack at her heels, because there is no press pack in Donegal. In that sense, it is a tactically intelligent choice, but it is also a deeply revealing one, because Sarah Ferguson is not someone who ever previously sought this kind of retreat. She is not someone who longed for quiet coastal walks and simple meals. She is someone who craved the spotlight, who needed the audience, who measured her own worth in terms of the rooms she could fill and the cameras she could attract. The fact that she is now hiding in a country not her own, in a county the press doesn't bother to cover, in a lodge where other guests have probably never seen Buckingham Palace, is a measure of how completely her world has collapsed. Reports suggest she was spotted on coastal walks, keeping a low profile, staying off social media, not calling journalists, not releasing statements. Silence. For a woman whose career was built entirely on the management of public perception, who gave hundreds of interviews, published memoirs, launched podcasts, hired and fired PR teams with remarkable regularity, and silence is not a strategy. Silence at this point is surrender. The gap between who Sarah Ferguson believed she was and who she has been revealed to be is, in 2026, a chasm. And the £113-a-night room on the Irish coast is where that chasm currently lives. The public reckoning. Here is the moment to pause and ask you, watching this, a direct question. Do you feel sorry for her? It's more complicated than it might appear, because there are genuinely two ways to look at the Sarah Ferguson story. One view is that she was a woman who made catastrophically bad decisions in an era when the full scale of Epstein's crimes was not yet understood.
Jeffrey Epstein. But this latest drop of documents reveals the extent of Sarah Ferguson's ties.
That she was financially desperate, that she was manipulated, that she was naive rather than complicit, and that she is now being punished with a severity that exceeds what the evidence warrants. This view has some merit. Sarah Ferguson has always been more chaotic than calculating. Her financial disasters were not the product of sophisticated scheming, they were the product of someone who fundamentally could not manage money, who kept throwing herself into ventures that failed, and who was therefore always vulnerable to someone offering financial rescue. Epstein specialized in exactly that kind of rescue. He found people who needed money and made himself indispensable to them. But here is the counter-argument, and it is the more powerful one. The emails do not read like the correspondence of someone being manipulated. They read like the correspondence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway. The email in which she reportedly assured Epstein she would never call him a pedophile in private, while publicly maintaining distance, is not the behavior of a naive woman who got in over her head. It is the behavior of someone making a cold, calculated trade. Public respectability in exchange for private loyalty, and the emails in which she reportedly connected him to people in her own circle, including her goddaughter, go beyond financial dependence into something far darker. Those are not the actions of someone who was simply desperate for money. The public has largely reached its verdict. The corporate sponsors fled, the charity donors withdrew, the platforms went dark, the royal protection was removed. The friends went quiet. This is what public accountability looks like when it finally arrives. Not a trial, not a sentence, but a comprehensive withdrawal of the social and financial infrastructure that made a particular kind of life possible. What do you think? Drop it in the comments. Is she a victim of circumstance, or did she make every choice that led her here? Is there a way back? It is worth asking, because history occasionally surprises us, whether there is any realistic path back for Sarah Ferguson. The honest answer is, it is very hard to see one. Every previous recovery in her public life was built on the same mechanism: fall from grace publicly, acknowledge mistakes with apparent humility, then convert that humility into a new brand. The comeback queen, the woman who refused to quit, the duchess who learned her lesson.
I've just returned from an extraordinary encounter with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York.
It worked multiple times. The Weight Watchers partnership, the Oprah interview, the memoirs and speaking tours. Every time the world wrote her off, she found a way to monetize the redemption arc. But the redemption arc requires one essential ingredient. The public must believe the repentance is genuine. In 2026, with the emails in the public domain showing precisely the gap between her public repentance and her private loyalty, that belief is gone. You cannot sell "I've learned my lesson" when there is documented evidence that you were simultaneously performing that narrative for cameras while privately assuring its subject that the performance was exactly that, a performance. The audience for Sarah Ferguson's redemption arc has seen the script. They know it's a script, and they are not buying tickets. There is also the question of platform. Without companies, without a charity, without corporate sponsors, without royal adjacency, she has no stage on which to mount a comeback. What she has left is silence, the Irish coast, and a future that is genuinely, profoundly uncertain. And for those of us watching, that uncertainty raises a deeply human question, one that goes beyond the titles and the scandals and the email forensics. What does a woman like this do when the world she built is gone? We genuinely do not know, and that, perhaps, is the most haunting part of this entire story. The windswept coast of Donegal is, by any objective measure, a beautiful place to be. The Atlantic light on the cliffs, the sound of the sea, the anonymity of a small lodge where nobody asks you about your ex-husband's arrest, your charity's closure, or the emails currently being discussed in a U.S. courtroom. For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you can breathe out there. But the world does not stay paused. The DOJ process continues. The UK legal questions are gathering momentum. The company closures are permanent. The charity is shuttered. The brands are gone. And when the fog lifts over Donegal, when Sarah Ferguson eventually has to leave that lodge and face the world beyond those cliffs, the reckoning waiting for her will not have softened in her absence. She has spent her entire adult life managing perception, controlling the narrative, finding the right angle, the right interview, the right comeback moment. In 2026, the narrative has finally outrun her. The most honest thing that can be said about where Sarah Ferguson is right now, not just geographically in a lodge in Ireland, but existentially in the story of her life, is this. She is standing at the edge of everything she built, watching the tide come in, and for the first time, there is no palace to retreat to, no title to hide behind, no financier to call, no charity launch to distract, no comeback story left to sell, just the wind off the Atlantic, and the very long, very cold walk back. If this video told you something the mainstream press hasn't, share it, because the developments coming in the next few weeks may move faster than anyone expects. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next update. And drop your answer in the comments right now. Do you think Sarah Ferguson will ever find a way to rebuild? Or is this finally the end of the road?